afternoon. My name is Susan Cáceres, and I am pleased to welcome you to the Tiered Instruction and Intervention Experiences of the Vail and Mahtomedi District webinar on behalf of the National Center on Response to Intervention. The National Center on Response to Intervention is a technical assistance and dissemination center funded by the Office of Special Education Programs. The center's mission is to build the capacity of state education agencies to assist local education agencies in implementing proven and promising models for RTI. We are pleased you could join us today. We'll be getting started in just a few minutes, but before we hear from our presenters, we would like to review a few technical details about today's event and offer a few suggestions and guidelines. We trust that you have had success logging into the technology, but if you encounter any difficulties at any point during today's session, we ask that you contact the live meeting technical support staff at 1-866-493-2825. The number is posted in the Q&A window for your convenience. Please use the question and answer window throughout this session to type a question regarding technical issues or presentation content. The Q&A tab is located at the top of your screen. Once you open the tab, in order to ask a question, place your cursor in the small box on the top, type your question, and click Ask. Please note that your anonymity is protected and no names will appear in the question box. If you prefer that your questions be answered privately, please specify that in the text box. Our presenters will pause 3 times during the session questions and provide oral answers. Please note that the webinar software only allows you to type 1 question unless your previous question has already been answered. A quick note about the audio portion of this session. We'll be recording this event so it can be available online later for those who missed it today. In order to produce the best quality recording, we have muted all the phone lines to minimize background noise. If you have a comment or question for our presenters, please use the question and answer tab at the top of the screen. We are fortunate to have Laurie Emery, Denise, Waalen, and Lynne Viker with us today. Laurie is principal of the Old Vail Middle School in Vail School District in Arizona. Over the past several years, she has overseen the implementation of response to intervention at the middle school level. Lynne Viker is the Director of Special Services, and Denise Waalen is the Assistant Superintendent at the Mahtomedi School District. In 2004, they began researching and subsequently implementing response to intervention and positive behavior interventions and support in the district. Their initial focus was at the early primary level, K2, and then progressed to the intermediate, grades 3 through 5 in 2005, and with the secondary level being implemented this past year. So we are very fortunate to have all 3 of them sharing their experiences with us today. Denise, Lynne, and Laurie, you'll need to unmute your phone line since we have remuted all of the phone lines. And we will hand this over to our presenters. We will start with Laurie.
Good morning. Today, for the overview of our webinar, I would like to fill you in that we're going to be covering several topics. Initially, setting the stage for RTI in both of our school districts, looking at district-level support in the Vail School District, and then talking about district belief and logistical considerations from our colleagues in Minnesota. We'll follow that up with the interventions and tiered instructions that we've both looked at, the integrated model and the middle school model that we use. After that, some conversations about the lessons that we've both learned and the resources that have been used during our process with this. In Vail, one of the things that has helped us be successful in our RTI process has been the district-level support that we have been afforded. We've had support from both the curriculum and special education departments at our district as we have moved our RTI model initially from the elementary schools into the middle schools. We've had the opportunity to work with them on data collection and have had a data storage bank provided for us. We've also worked on a district calendar with teachers from all different areas of our school district coming together to calendar the performance objectives in our state curriculum. That has been available to teachers both hardline and now online as they are able to click onto connections and pull up lessons and material for their use. An additional area that we have received a lot of support from our district has been in the area of personnel. We have psychologists at each of our schools. We have positions called student achievement teachers, and that position is our data coordinator person. And at each of our schools, that position has been put in place as we've reduced our number of special education students and our need for special education teachers. Instead of removing the positions, our district has allowed us to hire an additional person to help with data collection and working with teachers on instructional issues. We have multiple opportunities at the district level for the people in those positions, our psychologists, our student achievement teachers, to meet on a monthly basis to talk about the issues related to response to intervention as well as other concerns at the school. An additional piece that's incredibly important at the school level is the autonomy that building level principals are given to look at the needs of their particular school and to research and evaluate innovative practices and bring them into our schools, looking at the research base behind them and looking at the needs of our particular community. We receive a great deal of district level support from our curriculum special education departments in each of those areas. As we have developed these practices within individual schools, we've seen them move out then into district-wide practice, and that's how RTI has evolved in our district, by beginning practices at one school and then moving out into the other schools. Also, our school district has very closely looked at the performance objectives outlined by our state and has calendared those objectives across the school district by content area and grade level. So a person that would walk into a sixth grade classroom at my school would see a certain math performance objectives being taught, that if they went to any other school, middle school in our district, they would see that same performance objective being taught at the same time. So we have an alignment of when we teach performance objectives. An additional piece that's incredibly important in our district is our reteach and enrich model. This is built into all of our K-8 schools and is part of our school day. Students that have been unsuccessful in performing on a formative assessment are placed in a reteach class the following week for additional instruction in that particular concept. Sometimes it's with their own teacher, sometimes it's with a different teacher so they can hear it being taught in a different way. For students that have been successful in mastering that performance objective, an enrichment period is offered, also aligned with our standards, where students are able to expand their knowledge of a particular performance objective. A key piece for all of our schools across the district and certainly here at our middle school is our use of data to drive instruction. We collect data throughout the year from our formatives and other pieces of assessment that we use, and teachers meet regularly with student achievement teachers and principals to evaluate that instruction. Weekly or every other week meetings are held to look at the most current pieces of data. A strong piece provided by our district and also within schools individually is the professional development of our teachers. Our new teachers are taught during new teacher induction at the beginning of the year what our RTI process looks like. Our special ed director and our director of our assistant superintendent of special projects make the time to make sure that all new teachers are informed of those processes that are in place at all of our schools. And then within the schools themselves, we provide additional professional development opportunities. Here at Old Vail, we use our staff meeting times, our faculty meetings, to provide additional professional development for teachers. And we also have set aside time every other week for our special education teachers to meet and have professional development also. In our district, we have implemented school-wide universal screening for K-5 since the year 2003, and universal screening in math, reading, and writing K-8 since 2004. Denise and Lynne?
And Denise or Lynne, can you unmute your phones?
Can you hear us now?
Yes, perfect.
All right. Okay. In Mahtomedi, this is Denise Waalen. In Mahtomedi, I would probably echo many of the beliefs and similar strategies that Laurie had shared that they're using in Arizona. One of the things that we started out with when we started looking at the response to intervention philosophy is really what do we expect as a leadership team. And for many years we had said that kids were first, but we really realized that many of the things that we were actually doing weren't putting students first. And so our shift was the primary focus on student outcomes and supporting teachers' needs to fulfill that. We also began to identify a shared vision and develop a plan to support our staff with the skills that they would need to be able to have to support students at their current academic level and need, realizing that equal may not be the same as fair, and while that might be easy to say, it's not always easy to do in practice. Another leadership philosophy that we had to have discussion about is that the responsibility for our students was shared. When a student in the past had been identified as needing extra support, many times once they were identified as a special education student, the feeling was that now it was the special education department's responsibility for that student's growth. And we really had to move away from that to a shared belief that it was a team of people working together to support that student. Finally, there are some certain non-negotiable factors that had to be acknowledged regardless of personal philosophy. As we were going through the change and looking at what we would need to do to be able to make the response to intervention process successful within the district, we had to put aside some of our personal beliefs and come together about what truly was best practice for kids.
This is Lynne Viker, and some of the reasons you may want to look at shifting to the RTI model would be looking at the students that are not making the desired academic or social and emotional growth that you really feel and need. Also, the collaboration amongst the staff really could improve, or you would like it to improve. And then looking at staff feeling, dissatisfied with the traditional model for seeking help for students. Wait until they are behind, so far, and then they're getting the help. So this way you can actually help them quite a bit sooner. Also, the staff is not able to address the wide range of needs for all the students in the classroom. When you have 28, 30 students in the classroom and such a wide range of abilities, they are not able to really meet the needs of all those individual students. And then the data, there's a lot of schools out there now collecting data, but nobody really knows what are we supposed to be doing with it. And so some of those things would be key things your district or your schools may want to look at or consider the RTI model. Go ahead with that.
The logistical considerations that we had to make when we were examining what would work best for us for the response to intervention beginning at the primary level really was one of the hardest roadblocks at the beginning to overcome. we began looking at what we were offering students already, and the process really became apparent that we needed to be able to change some things. We had an elementary school of about 600 students with 2 full-time reading coaches. And in the old model, our reading literacy coaches were pulling students from the classroom, giving them the appropriate level of instruction, but then immersing them back into the classroom at a different level than they may be successful with. So our reading coaches really came to us and said, how can we change this? For our planning and the research that we did with this, we knew that we had to reorganize the building schedules, which again is easier said than done, but very doable. We looked at having a literacy and math block where we would have 90 minutes of literacy instruction and 60 minutes of math instruction that would be uninterrupted blocks of time during the day. With that, we're very intentional about the flexible grouping of students, and there's quite a bit of movement on a monthly basis, depending on what PLC data, professional learning community data, the teams are looking at and making changes based on student need.
Some other logistical considerations we were looking at too was the behavioral data management system, such as the school-wide information system, and making sure we had that in place so we could really measure some of the data for the behavior, and also obtaining at least 80% of the commitment for staff, and going back to our professional learning communities and just making sure that they were on board with looking at the change to the RTI model. Then the trust building activities, we had some different activities throughout the building with such as Barbara Sanderson's Talk It Out and discussion on that, also going to NWA training to look at the data, understand what it means, and how we can evaluate that in your PLC groups. And then identifying one staff person to manage the RTI logistics and one to manage the PBIS logistics, such as all the behavioral interventions that you might be doing for the PBIS or the academic piece of it too for the RTI.
We move on to the next slide, the interventions in tiered instruction in Mahtomedi. Lynne had previously mentioned as we began this process, we started with the K-2 primary school of about 600 students and tiered our RTI process starting with K-2 and then incorporating 3-5 the following year, and now our middle school and our high school are following. One of the things as we worked on this system together, we realized that the interventions for academics needed to be mirrored with the behavior interventions at the same time. And so when Lynne had mentioned the PBIS, that's the positive behavior intervention and support. And we had a statewide grant in Minnesota to work with George, the guy out of it. At that time he was in Oregon, working with positive behavior, really intentional prevention of behavior difficulties, and then the response to intervention, and combining those two. So as we were working in teams, it was more of a wraparound approach to problem solving for students. And for our problem solving there, as you can see on the slide, the third bullet down, problem solving teams were for our students who we had intensive concerns about. We have standard treatment protocols for our less intensive concerns, and then our focused treatment protocols are for intermediate concerns. So based on the level of needs identified by the teacher and the student, we have a 3-tiered model that helps us identify what the data is and what the problems may be. The 3-tiered model includes the data and assessment systems that we're using, the problem-solving structures we're using, and then looking at the interventions and really increasing the intensity of support or the allocation that we give to a certain student based on the data and the need.
On the next slide, you'll see our pyramid space, and we actually have 3 different pyramids we'll be showing you throughout this presentation. And one is going to be on the data and assessment systems that we have in place here in Mahtomedi, And then the second one will be on the instructional practices and interventions, and then the third one will be the problem-solving structure and how we were able to connect the staff development piece of it for that. But looking at the data assessment system, we set it up similar, as you've seen the triangle many times for the RTI, with the base level there at what does the whole building or district have in place for data. And we've listed a few things there that our district has in place, such as the Ames Web for CBMs. Everybody goes through that 3 times a year. NWEA 2 to 3 times a year in the different buildings. Also the Swiss data I was telling you about, the behavior to monitor the different behaviors and measure when the certain behaviors are happening. Teacher reports, work samples, health records, running records, report cards, attendance records. Those are things that every student in the whole building has in place. Then you'll look above that, you'll see it's the secondary, the targeted area for maybe 10 to 15% of our students that need just a little bit of additional help and assistance for monitoring that data a little more often. We're looking at the Ames Web, doing that more bi-weekly for monitoring, curriculum, assessments such as the check-in, other check-in and check-out systems, mini FBAs, and then teacher managing behavior charts and things like that you might do a little bit more often than what you do for the 80 to 85% of the kids in Tier 1. And then for Tier 3, up at the top of the pyramid there, we have for more individuals or intensive instruction, which is about 5% of the students. We're looking at weekly monitoring, portfolio reviews, FBAs, behavior charts, just a little bit more of that criterion reference tests and more of that intensive monitoring.
Next, when we try to determine where our students are and what type of intervention they might need, we looked at getting some support from TIES, which is our regional technology and educational support. And they looked at data from the metropolitan area for us, doing a logical regression analysis of all the data to help us find out what the probability or the probability of our students passing our Minnesota Comprehensive Assessment. And with that, you'll see in a minute on the next slide that our Tier 1 is our high probability. 90% of the students in Tier 1 have a chance of proficiency on those assessments. Tier 2, moderate probability, 40 to 50% chance of proficiency. So with some intensive work, we like to obviously see those students move from Tier 1 or Tier 2 to Tier 1 throughout the year. And then our students who would fall in that Tier 3 level, we know that there's a low probability, and we really need to put a lot of resource and support into those students in their instruction.
On the next slide, we have how we are determining our tiers for the population and the cut scores. We have just an example of what you'd look at for the different grade levels. We have grade 2 and 3 there listed for Tier 1 plus, Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. We actually broke off the Tier 1 plus for some of the gifted and talented students, so we could look at that and individualize for them also. And then if you go to the next slide, we have how we're determining the tiers for the social, emotional, and behavioral skill part of it. I talked earlier about the Swiss referrals, and that's our data system of monitoring how many office discipline referrals there are. 0 to 1, it would be Tier 1, 2 to 6, Tier 2, and 6 plus, and consider more Tier 3, meaning more of that intensive support. Then also you look at, we have another acronym, the SWIM, which is the school-wide intervention model. We kind of combined a lot of the acronyms and called it the SWIM. It's the list of referrals then when we generate Tier 2 with the intensive health and mental health needs of the students. We actually go with the PLC teams and talk about who would we put on for the Tier 2 and what kind of help do they need for that. Then the health office visits and attendance information, we can generate and add that information to decide on students needing Tier 2 or 3 support, such as the nurse visits and looking at just some of the data there. Currently, we are restructuring the health services support to help support our RTI model in the district.
The next slide is phase 2, and it's the instructional practices and interventions. And once again, you see the pyramid model that we're using, and you can see on the left the academic skills, academic behaviors in the middle, and then social and behavior skills. One of the reasons we broke this down is we found that many of our students had the skills to advance academically, but some of the behaviors, their organization or material management, time management, those kind of things, were getting in the way of their success, and that had nothing to do with their ability to perform or their social behavior skills. And so when we looked at this pyramid, it once again is going through the 80 to 85% of the students having universal support in instructional practices and intervention, and then more individualized support in any of those areas as we go up the pyramid. On the following slide, you'll find we've listed and shared with you some Tier 1 intervention, a menu actually of academics, and many of these you might be familiar with or have something similar within your district. On the left-hand side is literacy, and on the right is math. At this point, we have a core literacy program, the Houghton Mifflin, but we also supplement that with flexible grouping at the appropriate instructional level. We use several different assessments to do that. Rigby guided reading is one of the assessment tools that we use. Pecker signing we use with our primary students, and it's a type of combination of sign language to support phonemic recognition. And then we have additional supplements looking at the data. Just if students are struggling as their teachers go through their regular assessments, there is support within the curriculum to address those needs. With math, we have the Everyday Math Program, or University of Chicago Mathematics Program. And there are several things that we use to support students at that Tier 1 level. Also, Math Minutes, Yearly Progress Pro, and then really spending some time, as Laurie had mentioned earlier, on the curriculum development and alignment of our outcomes. Similar in Minnesota, the alignment of our outcomes is similar to what Laurie is talking about calendaring the curriculum in Arizona.
On the next slide, we have Tier 1 intervention menu for behavior. But because of the amount of time, I'm just going to list up a couple key things we have for the Tier 1, and that's the responsive classroom. The whole structure within the whole building we have for the elementary buildings is responsive classroom. And then we also have for the other students, you can see the list as you go down, such as take a break, visual schedules for the classroom, conflict resolution, the parent information. There's just a list, a menu there for the Tier 1 students. Then the Tier 2 intervention menu on the academics is the next slide.
And with all of the intervention menus that we're sharing, we'd be glad to answer questions. We won't spend a lot of time. Many of them you may be familiar with, but our intent was to have fidelity and consistency across our elementary buildings. And so it wasn't a shoot and miss type of what are we going to do next. We wanted to be able to have a menu and have trained staff and available curriculum and materials to support the needs of the students. So as you look through these and notice through the academics, once again, they're just as we get higher up on the pyramid, the assessment is more frequent, and we have more tools to address the student needs at each of those areas.
You can see on the Tier 2 intervention menu for behaviors, this gets a little bit more intense. We do more of the check-in, check-out for the students that have that need. We might have a mini SBA where we can see where the behavior concerns are and target those specifically. Do some sensory breaks, morning run through the visual schedules for a few of those kids, just a handful of kids that need that.
And then finally, the third Tier 3 intervention menu. Once again, you can see many of the interventions that were listed in Tier 2, but once again, more specific, smaller groups, sometimes individual groups, and much more frequent, at least on a weekly basis. And what we've really stressed is looking exactly at what the data is telling us, and then matching that intervention and tracking that intervention and looking for success. And if we aren't finding success, trying another tool from our toolkit.
In the following slide, it will be the Tier 3 intervention menu for behavior. We'll have more of that one-to-one direct instruction, maybe a full FBA, frequent sensory experiences planned throughout the day, just depending on what those individual students need. And we can break it down to what their specific needs are by looking at the data. We also, on the following slide, we have the Phase 3, which is the problem-solving structure. And so as we talk about the problem-solving structure, we have it set up again on the pyramid base of what we have in place within every building throughout the district with the Tier 1, the developmental design coaches, or the PLCs that we have for all the grade levels, the academic committees, informal consultation. That's going on within each of the buildings. The second level, the 10 to 15%, we're looking at the swim team, more of that, really looking at the data, trying to identify what the areas of concern are, and just the formal consultation within for either academic or behavior. We have an academic specialist and a behavior specialist within the school buildings that will go into the PLC meetings and actually sit down and talk to them about what are their high levels of concern and how can we try that within the classroom, how can we support that student within that classroom, giving them some different ideas. And then you look at the more individual intensive for the 5% of the students that are still struggling even after some of that targeted instruction that they have within the classroom. So you're going to look then at do we need to look for more of that specialized instruction, the school psychologists, what are some of the other people and support within the buildings to help those particular kids.
Moving on to the next slide, we are looking at district-wide solution-based structures. And once again, we're back to the pyramid. And if you look at the bottom with the problem-solving structures on this space, really the core and why we feel this has been successful moving through the grade levels in the buildings and now on up to the high school is that we have professional learning communities in place. And that's allowed our teachers to look at data, look at lesson planning together, identifying where needs are not only grade level wise, but perhaps classroom level, and really keeping some consistency within the buildings, looking at communication and analyzing the data. At the professional learning community level, there's alignment of grade level and individual student systems. We also feel it's very important that each of our buildings have a building leadership team, which many of you probably have in place also. And the building leadership team at that point can bring up any concerns or things that are not working in the system. We found that as we move to new schools, there are always new challenges. And the building leadership team has really helped us to identify how things look differently in different schools and what the needs may be. Finally, at the top, the administrative team is important in aligning all the district systems. One of the reasons we feel we've been successful is working with special education as a partnership and really looking what we can do for all students. And that has been, for us, a strength of the program. Lynne has been very creative and flexible in how she helps support us and gives us direction on making sure that we aren't leaving kids behind, and those who are struggling, we are giving them as much support as we can. So it really is a district-wide understanding of what we're doing to help support students. And the final next slide for general outcomes, we're looking at things that have happened district-wide, and you can read those for yourself, but one of the things I think that's encouraging for us is just the increased collaboration between staff. They feel like all students are supported. If you happen to have a student who's very challenging or struggling within your classroom, it's no longer just your challenge to work with. And we have literacy skills have improved. We've just shared with our school board dramatic increases in our students moving from Tier 3 to Tier 1 by the end of the year that we'd be glad to share. But as you can see, the doors are now opening for more opportunities, receiving grants and more support, which is helpful for us because the teachers are seeing that the data is showing them that the system is working. The data is also helping us share with the state that it's working within our school district, and we are able to offer more opportunities through grant money.
And we should have added to that general outcomes, literacy skills and math skills have been improving. In fact, we did have them share at the board the other night too on how some of the data shows that the math skills are improving in that area too. The impact on of shared responsibility in special ed has been just a huge change with the district here. With the impact on the referrals are now not, okay, what can we do when this child's going to be in special ed? It's more of, what's the solution? You know, we're seeing some issues, some concerns. What are some solutions? What are some ideas that we can do to help this child? And we're also assessing the right students versus going through quite a few really not needed evaluations because they're getting that support earlier on. In the long term, we're looking at the initial evaluations for the 0708 went down, but also this year the evaluations are going down too. We looked at the K-2 initial evaluations. There was a total of 3 that were more of the poor response to the academic intervention, and 5 were more for the private school. So all of the evaluations have been going down drastically within the last few years because of the response intervention. And at that time, Wildwood is the elementary K-2 building there. We had 0 parents insisting on having the evaluation versus going through some of the interventions, first of all. So we've seen a lot of nice results that way. Thank you.
We've gotten a few questions, and so we'd like to take a moment to answer them. One question that's come up is, are any of your schools using this data to drive data-driven program at the elementary level at Tier 2? If not, why not? And she's talking about the program is Reading Recovery Program.
Laurie, do you have Reading Recovery in Arizona?
No, not in our school district. We're not doing Reading Recovery.
We've had some previous experience with Reading Recovery, and where we considered it at the very beginning when we were looking at our toolkit and what we would need for students as far as support, but have found that to sustain the amount of resources to be able to have the number of students that we needed to be able to be working with a Reading Recovery teacher was not sustainable for the district. So we have not used Reading Recovery.
We have heard of good results, though, from that program. Mm-hmm. We started with the Orton-Gillingham approach because of the trouble the students were having with decoding and the phonological skills in that area. So that's why we decided to train the students, or train the teachers on that program to start with. And now we keep adding to our toolkit.
Another question is, how long have you been using the RTI model, and how have you been able to evaluate progress?
This is from Mahtomedi. We've been using it now 4 years. We started at the elementary building, and as you said at the beginning, we're moving now into the middle school and high school, and we're evaluating the progress by looking at the data. We're seeing students' improvement has been tremendous, and then also the response from parents and from students. One of the teachers brought up at the board meeting last week, he says, you know, even if you set this data aside, when you hear a kid that was struggling with math at the beginning of the school year, and they're coming down and they're skipping down to their classroom saying, I love math, I can't wait for math to start here. That's some of the data that we're looking at too that's impressive. And
here in Vail, we've seen some of the same things. And one of the big things that I noticed as you were talking earlier was we also have seen a decrease in the number of students referred for special ed testing, and when they are referred, they are the right students being referred. We've also seen a huge shift in our culture. We've been using RTI since 2002, and our culture is incredibly data-driven, and our use of data and our looking at interpreting it, reading it, and using it to drive instructional decisions is district-wide.
A question is, what do you use for screening and other ongoing suggestions? All right, I'm assuming ongoing suggestions for ongoing measures.
Laurie, do you want to share for middle school screening?
Again, we're pretty similar. We use a curriculum-based measurement for our middle school screening. We screen 3 times a year. We use a maze, which is a closed procedure, timed closed procedure that's a CBM measurement for reading. We use correct writing sequence for our writing assessment, and we use currently a basic facts probe for our math.
Another question is, have your special education teachers taken on the role of interventionists in addition to their teaching assignments?
In Vail, at our school, my special education teachers call themselves intervention strategists, so they're very much a part of that.
I like that title. That's a, yeah, they have added to the, their teaching skills with different interventions, and that's kind of look at the data and decide where are the holes and what do we need to do, and what are some of the, that hooks on with the staff development training.
And I think it's really helped support also our, in the past, general education teachers. There's not the differentiation between, they're just all teachers teaching literacy at the same time. So the interventions that our special education staff are using are also, many of those tools are being used in the regular classroom also.
And our Tier 2 is not taught by special education staff, and so then looking at that Tier 2 area, we do have to do the training and the staff development for that staff, depending on the needs.
We do that as well at the middle level, but we use a co-teaching model of instruction. So our special education teachers are in the classroom with the general education teachers, which allows a much broader base in terms of helping kids that are struggling.
And right at this point, we'll take one more question and move on to the next section. The question is, aside from guided reading and flexible grouping, what do classroom teachers do or provide their students before moving them on to Tier 2?
I can answer this for the elementary. When we're going through, the guided reading is really for the fluency, phonemic awareness, comprehension. That's the main, one of the main pieces of assessment. But through there are all kinds of assessment techniques and strategies that are also in our core curriculum. So if a student is struggling at Tier 1, then we would go back and make sure that some of the more easily integrated interventions within the classroom are taking place. And all of that work happens during their professional learning communities when they're coming together as teams and saying, all right, I have this student for literacy really struggling in this area. What are you seeing when you see that student? And so that's where the process begins, and it gets more intense with the need of the student. The list of interventions is probably the best thing for you to go back to look at the menu.
And I'm going to discuss that in the middle school piece coming up, so I hope to cover that in the next section.
And why don't we have you go on into discuss that section now, Laurie?
Okay. We have a big picture of data sources that we look at. STEEP is our screening that we do 3 times a year, and it's our general outcome measure. So we look at how students are moving forward. STEEP, by the way, stands for Screening to Enhance Equitable Placement. We use ATI, which is a company similar to NWEA, to develop our benchmark tests that we do 3 to 4 times a year depending on content and grade level. And we also built a formative test bank with them. We use that formative test as a performance objective is taught to look at mastery. So we could have formative tests being given weekly or a couple of times a week depending on how a teacher is moving through performance objectives. And we use that data to look at students who need Tier 2 intervention. Students who aren't mastering the curriculum after classroom instruction are offered the opportunity for a reteach the following week, and we retest at the end of that week. In addition, we use AIMS, which is our state test, to evaluate student progress on grade level performance objectives. And then finally, we use our teacher-made tests, which are both formative and summative, as we're looking at student progress. On the next slide, part of our big picture is also the personnel involved. And in our school, and mostly across our school district, those people that are directly involved with RTI include the principal, our student achievement teacher, which is that person who is our data coordinator, our school psychologist, and our classroom teachers. One of the things that's probably more unique to our situation than some others is the role of our school psychologist. Because we've gotten away from that model of test everybody that comes through, our psychologist time is spent with working with classroom teachers, working with special educators, and also working with students. Our school psychologists are the ones who are responsible for setting up our interventions when we need to look at a higher level intervention based on a student's performance on our universal screening. And so she works with classroom teachers and sets up a peer coaching model for the intervention, and then trains the teacher and the coach and the student to be coached on what that intervention is and how it works. She's become a regular part of our dialogue about students at risk and is a key player on our RTI team. On the next slide, look at what our Tier 1 looks like. We focus a lot of our attention, the majority of our attention, in fact, on Tier 1 and our curriculum. We have worked over the years with teachers to align our curriculum to the state standards and calendar them, as I mentioned. We use formative data on a regular basis for our content areas, and we hold data team meetings with the teachers. So we sit down every week or every 2 weeks and we look at the most current data. We talk about performance of students that are at risk, whether they're in special education or not in special education. We look at what kind of intervention needs to take place or what kind of reteach opportunity needs to happen for those students. Another key piece is the professional development of our teachers, and it starts right at the beginning as they're going through new teacher induction when they first start working in our district. They go through 4 days at the beginning of the school year and several more throughout the school year in terms of new teacher training, and then that's carried into their second year as well. We also do a great deal of professional development at sites using data to drive what we're working on with teachers. Just like we would do that with students, we look at the data we're collecting when we're planning professional development for our teachers. We also look very carefully at our hiring process. We talk to teachers as we're going into hiring about RTI, about use of data, so that it becomes very clear right from the start that this is very important to our district. The leadership of our school is set up in a way that is a team structure. We have 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade teams within those grades, and each team has a team leader that meets weekly with me and with the student achievement teacher, and we look at big issues related to either grade levels or content areas, and we make the decisions at the team level. then that is at the instructional team level, and then that's transferred down to the teams on a weekly basis. We also use that time to look at what kind of trainings we need to plan for the future. On the next slide, we have some information about our Tier 1 classrooms and how that's set up. And again, we go back to looking at how do we decide who's struggling, and that goes back to our data team meetings when we're evaluating the information that we have. We look at our formatives, our benchmarks, our aims, our teacher tests, our universal screening. And like our colleagues from Minnesota, we also have a very strong PBIS program in place, and we look at that behavioral data as well. As we're looking at our reteach for Tier 2, we make sure that we're not looking at the same teachers teaching the same lesson the same way, recognizing that if students didn't get it in the classroom the first time, if we teach it the same way, it's probably not going to be learned the second time. So teachers will switch students around. If there's 2 math teachers on a 7th grade team, they'll send their students to the other teacher, and they also will collaborate about the strategies being used. Sometimes that includes different materials, but sometimes it just includes a different teaching strategy. We do a lot of progress monitoring at our upper 2 tiers. We look at what students are learning. We look at their reteach data in terms of their testing. If we're doing a classroom intervention, we're monitoring that on a regular basis, every week collecting data for that as well. And for personnel, like our colleagues, we look at Tier 2 as a classroom issue, and we do most of our reteach within that classroom. The way that works is after formative tests are given, the teachers develop a list of students that did not successfully complete that formative. It goes to our student achievement teacher, and she sends that out to all the teachers. We communicate a lot electronically, so everything goes out quickly, and teachers are very used to checking emails for that kind of communication. We do have teachers designated either reteach or enrich, so that our students who do master the standards are offered opportunities for enrichment on those or other standards within our curriculum. And our student achievement teacher monitors that post-test. After a student's gone through a reteach, they monitor with the teachers to make sure those concepts have been mastered at that level. And then our team leaders monitor and organize our enrichment classes. Things that happen beyond the classroom in Tier 2 include the involvement of our psychologists and peer coaches in identification of struggling students. We use levels of, we use materials that are pulled from a variety of sources. Some were on the resource list that you saw from the elementary model, the 6-minute solutions, and we follow up with that with our progress monitoring as well. We schedule interventions with teachers, so when we're planning to do an intervention for a student that struggled on one of our universal screenings, we look for a 3-week window so that our intervention can go over 15 consecutive days and we don't have big gaps. Personnel involved in that level are, again, the classroom teacher, our peer coaches, our psychologist, and our student achievement teacher. On the next slide, you'll see our Tier 2 in detail. And again, I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. We do use a standard protocol model primarily. We used to do our universal screening 3 times a year. We identify at that point whether we have a class-wide versus an individual problem. If it's a class-wide problem at a particular grade level, then we do a full class intervention. If it's an individual problem, we do a can't do, won't do. The intervention, if it's a can't do, looks very different than the won't do, which is a motivational issue. And then we set up the interventions with peer coaches. We progress monitor for generalization. This mostly takes place within the classroom. If it's a writing or a reading concern, it would happen in the language arts classroom for 7th and 8th grade. For math, again, it would be in the math classrooms. We do also keep our psychologists involved in that as we're evaluating the integrity of our interventions and our assessments. We do regular integrity checks to make sure that teachers are following through on protocol as it's outlined in our standard interventions. We are looking for a response to a generalization probe. And again, the intervention's not intended to fix the problem. It's to determine whether a student is going to respond or not. And if they are responding, then we will set up additional interventions in the classroom for the teacher to work on. Moving from Tier 2 to Tier 3 on the next slide, in our district there are a couple of ways that that can happen. Child study teams, and those tend to come out of our data team meetings with teachers expressing concerns about student learning. But the more common way is an inadequate response to peer coaching intervention. And then that comes generally through our psychologist who's been doing the generalization testing. Each of these can result in a student being taken to a multidisciplinary evaluation team meeting to look at whether we need to do additional data collection for possible special education placement. And then our evaluation is based on the results of those interventions as well. In our school district, Tier 3 is considered special education on the next slide. The special education services at our school are provided in a co-teach setting. We do look at two different types of settings for our students: high incidence disabilities like specific learning disabilities. We keep in a co-teach. Students with more severe disabilities tend to be on another team because they have supportive paraprofessionals in the classroom. And we are looking at, as a district, monitoring special education goals using curriculum-based measurement. We are having a lot of our teachers at our site who are already doing that, and it's going to be spread district-wide in the next school year. We use that data from that progress monitoring to develop present levels for IEPs, to write goals, to make decisions about services, and to exit students. We have actually exited students from our special education program. The next slide talks about maintaining the tiers. As I said at the very beginning, it is part of our district and school culture. So it's expected and it's what we do. We've been doing it for a long time and it rolls out pretty seamlessly. We have consistent, knowledgeable leadership at our school that understands the process. We have training for new teachers coming in and ongoing professional development. And our district invests in the tools. We have a strong curriculum department support and the data collection and management. We do that through our district. We also have school and district level problem solving if we run into other concerns at other levels that our standard protocol doesn't address. And finally, that monitoring of integrity, that's one of the key pieces for us, that we make sure that we're doing it with integrity at all times. And that goes to back to Minnesota colleagues.
No, I think it's, if you can advance those slides, there'll be questions. And one of the questions that has come up is, at what tier are Title I services provided? Either Laurie or Lynne or Denise, could you answer what tier Title I services are provided?
I don't have Title I services at my school, so I will defer to my colleagues.
Can you hear us now?
Yes.
Okay, we
also are similar to Laurie. We have very minimal Title I services, so it's not a huge part. It's not a huge part of what we do. It's supplements a few curriculum choices and some training and that kind of thing, but it's not significant.
We look at some of the students if they need that additional support to make the growth they might be in a tier 2, and if they're needing some additional support, then they may need a little additional title instruction, so they'll have additional reading or math time.
Okay, another question is regarding the Tier 3. In some models, Tier 3 does not exclusively mean special education. And there's a question wondering whether Tier 3 means more than just special education in your district.
Yes, this is from Mahtomedi. We're looking at it. It's more than just the special education piece of it. For the Tier 3, we do look at, there are some students that aren't necessarily special education or have qualified for the special education. We look at, do they need that intensive intervention? Sometimes they'll come in and need that intensive intervention for half of a year, and then they're able to move on up to that Tier 2 level. So it isn't necessarily just special education students.
And here at Old Vail, we primarily look at Tier 3 as special education. We do have some students that need that higher level of intervention, and we do provide that support for them as well.
Another person was wondering if state scores are increasing as a result of these interventions.
I know in Vail we have seen an incredible increase in our state test scores since we implemented RTI. We've gone from fairly average test scores to the majority of our test scores across the district range from 85 to 90% mastery on state standards on the state test.
In Mahtomedi, we are similar. We unfortunately have been at this as long as Laurie has at Old Vail, and I can't wait till it comes to the point where it's seamless. But many of our, the Northwest evaluation assessment that we use with our students, our curriculum-based measurements, the data that we are looking at has shown significant improvement, especially looking at watching children move between the tiers, starting out at a Tier 3 level and moving on up to Tier 1 and Tier 2. That's really where we spend a majority of our time. The state assessments are important to us, and we do watch that closely, but many of our students, in Minnesota, we get our results during the summer, and then those students are on to the next teacher. So we really look at our formative assessments throughout the year very closely.
We had a question about CBM, curriculum-based measurements, and universal screening. What types of measures are you suggesting, or would you suggest for grades 9 through 12 or utilize?
Laurie, do you have systems in place at your high school?
We have done a few things, but we don't have a consistent approach at the high school. Several years ago, when we identified a math problem at the K-8 level, we actually did use a very basic fact screening at the high school because we were getting some complaints from geometry teachers that we weren't teaching basic facts. And so we did screen high school at that time and find that we have the same problems at high school. But as we've addressed those problems at the elementary and the middle school level, we aren't finding that that problem carries over to the high school because it's being fixed. We do have some enriched type classes and some reteach kinds of classes at our high school level, but we don't have the consistent approach across the three tiers of RTI academically at the high school. We do have it behaviorally with a real strong TBIS program at all of our high schools.
And we're just kind of starting it in Mahtomedi, so we're just beginning that with both. Actually, we started more with the math area for the high school for this year. So.
And then finally, before we move on to the next section, was where is data that is collected stored in your district? Can system-wide reports be generated to identify students?
I'll go first if you like. In Vail, we use an iSteep database for our universal screening, and all of our screening material is accessible in there. And we use we use Power School as our in-school system, and so we are able to access other test score information in that system.
In Mahtomedi, we don't have a data warehouse per se. We have several tools. The school-wide intervention and supports, the PBIS data that we keep track of doesn't currently, we aren't able to import it into our statewide reporting system, so we do have a couple of reporting systems that we pull up, but we can pull up individual student reports which are color-coded for tiers they're in or issues that they're having, and that happens at the principal level.
We have the same thing, and unfortunately with the behavioral data, we use two different systems, both our Power School and Swift, because of the graphing capability we're able to get from Swift.
Mm-hmm.
Then, since we are a little bit over time, could you quickly walk through the lessons learned?
Sure.
Suggestions for other districts.
Okay.
Sure. For the first slide for lessons learned, really systems change is hard. It's really the change more than any type of initiative. So going through this at different schools and different folks that we've spoke with, it wouldn't really be, as we look at it, not the initiative or a name, just looking at the systems change ideas, how we're going to support kids and have a continuum of support for all of our students. Laurie had mentioned earlier that the intervention and integrity checks with fidelity are very important. You need to have consistency in your professional learning teams or your leadership teams. Looking at data implementation in new buildings, you have to look at what is working already in that building. Many of our schools and systems have great things in place. They just need extra support at different areas of the continuum. So it's really starting with what you have and building on that, looking at your pacing, your funding, training. And one of the things that Laurie had mentioned earlier is staff changes, really putting people in the right place, matching them with their talents and how they can most influence students. And we would echo that our school psychologist positions and roles have changed significantly.
They really have. And you look at the next side of lessons learned, the diverse training needs that we have, depending on where they're at in different grade levels and buildings. We have to look at that so individually. It's not always the same. Responsiveness to the staff needs. So there may be a few teachers in that area that are strong, but we have to place them according to where the student needs are also. The staff roles, kind of balancing that expertise and looking at everything flexible. It's not like you're going to be in the one doing the same thing each year. Conflicts can arise when people don't understand, so communication is very, very important. Communication of what the intent is, why are we doing all these changes, what's happening here, and then the perception of what's fair. It really has to, you have to look at it from, this is bottom line, what are the students' needs, what are we looking at, and how are we structuring the whole district that way. And just the differences, the bottom, like the skills versus the whole language instructions, those things, you have to address those early on with the communication. Those are some of the things we really did learn through that. And humble suggestions on the last part, we can just briefly go through that. It was just start with really what you have. Start with the consensus of the building, like we talked about earlier. The best way to really stop everything right there is to say, not to let them know we're not going to change everything. We really want to go with the strengths in the building and then build on filling the holes and filling the gaps. Inventory what you have and using the core curriculum, looking at that, seeing, are there holes in that area, first of all. The data, storing the different data warehousing. You have to look at what is the data that you really want to use. And then setting up those problem-solving structures, the systems level, and then going into the building level part of it. So, and then humble suggestions too, we just have a few listed there of arranging available data to create a picture of your building, and looking at, I think I mentioned it earlier, if the non-responder rate is greater than 20%, you're evaluating your core curriculum then too. So you have to step back and look at that first. And those that are not responding, what are some of the common needs and common issues, using the data to look at that, and then do you have the standard treatment protocols to address what the non-responders.
And finally, couple suggestions. Number 3, filling in the gaps. We really believe that when you take a close look at what you have within your school or district, and then look at where the unmet needs are, that's where your resources should go, and that's where your training needs to go. And then really it needs to be a building-wide understanding of how we're going to set goals for students, look at data, and identify the needs, and then act on those needs. And so as you go through this process, it's difficult, and I think the encouraging a culture that celebrates success as you're starting out, start with small successes and celebrate those to help people understand that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Laurie?
Just real quickly, the 3 really big takeaways for us in Vail have been, start with your core curriculum. If you don't have that solid base, Tier 2 and 3 are just going to get away from you because the numbers are going to get bigger and bigger. If teachers aren't teaching solid general instruction, you're never going to get anywhere. So I'd say start with Tier 1 and make sure your core curriculum is solid. The second thing is make sure you have district support. And my colleagues are talking from the district level. I'm talking from the building level. We can have a great program and a great thing in place, but if we don't have district support and I leave, that program very easily goes away. So you have to have that district level support. And finally, you have to be ready to change your culture, because when this becomes part of that seamless daily operation, your culture looks very different than it looked before you started.
Mm-hmm. You would have to agree with that.
Thank you so much, Laurie Emery, Denise Waalen, and Lynne Viker for sharing your presentations today. I just wanted to let the participants know that if they'd like to print a copy of the PowerPoint slides from today's presentation, you may do so by clicking on the small printer icon at the bottom right-hand side of your screen. This will allow you to print a PDF. The slides will also be available on the National Center on Response to Interventions website. More information is available on our website, which is www.rti4success.org. That's RTI, the letter 4, and then SUCCESS.org. If you have additional questions that we were not able to answer during the webinar, or you have questions about tiered instruction and interventions, please email them to us at rtiwebinars, that's rtiwebinars @air.org. We would appreciate your feedback about today's session. Please take a few minutes to complete the webinar evaluation that you see on the screen. We value your feedback, and ultimately, your suggestions will assist us in making decisions for our future webinars. Once again, thank you for your participation today, and thank you, Laurie, Denise, and Lynne, for your excellent presentation.